everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into today's Author Talk series brought to you by the Library Speakers Consortium. The Library Speakers Consortium is a partnership of more than 150 library systems across more than 36 states with the goal of making Author Talks more accessible to communities of all sizes. I am Brandon Adler, your host and moderator in conversation with each of the wonderful best-selling, prize-winning, and acclaimed authors that you will hear from throughout our Author Talk series year-round. Today, we are honored and excited to have New York Times bestselling author and productivity influencer David Allen join us for an exciting chat about his book, Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity. Welcome, David. We're super happy to have you here today.
Thanks, Brandon. Delighted to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, of course. We're going to learn a lot more about you throughout the next hour, but let me get some housekeeping out of the way for our viewers. So I want to let you know that we have compiled some of your viewer questions that were pre-submitted with registration, but we will also be taking your additional questions throughout the entire conversation. So when you have a question, please click the comments questions button below this live stream to submit your questions as we progress through the talk. If you have a question right now, you can click it right now. That's just fine. As a reminder, if you're unable to attend the full talk for any reason whatsoever, you will be receiving a thank you for attending email anyway in about 24 hours. And in that email, you will find a link to the recording so you can go back and watch the full talk. So now to formally introduce our guest for today. David Allen grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana, and gradually migrated west to enroll in a graduate program at UC Berkeley. As well as being a black belt in karate, David is the international best-selling author of Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity, which has been translated into 30 languages, maybe more at this point. He is also the author of Ready for Anything, 52 Productivity Principles for Work and Life, Making It All Work, Winning at the Game of Work and the Business of Life, and Getting Things Done for Teens, Take Control of Your Life in a Distracting World. David is the founder and chairman of the David Allen Company. He continues to write articles and essays that address today's ever-changing issues about living and working in a fast-paced world while sustaining balance, control, and meaningful focus. So again, welcome, David. Thank you so much for being here. How are you this, I guess it's evening for you, right? Afternoon, late afternoon?
Yeah, I'm great. I just took the dogs out for their after-dinner walk, so they're happy, so I'm happy. Yeah.
Good. You can focus on you then when we're done with the talk and have a nice dinner. Relax.
Yeah. No, my wife cooked. She calls it the big lasagna.
Oh,
I guess that's like the Big Lebowski. I don't know, but it's the big lasagna. So we're having leftover lasagna, which is actually gets better sort of the longer it stays in the fridge. So
yeah, as it marinates. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Well, that sounds delicious. So we always end up talking about food when you talk to me. So the next thing is now I'm hungry, but we have something to do. So
Yeah. Well, come on, Louisiana. If you're from, Louisiana's party time, Charles.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Why else do you stay here? The beautiful, beautiful Louisiana and the food. Oh my gosh. Okay. So as you can imagine, we are huge fans of libraries around here, right? So to get us started, we have kind of 3 quick standard library-focused questions for you. First quick question, what library did you visit most as a child?
My local library in Shreveport. It's right there by my my elementary school, A.C. Steer Elementary School in Shreveport. And there was a local library there. I remember going in and reading all of the Heinlein science fiction. What was, I forget what it was, but that's where I walked in and sat down and would check out the books. And I thought that was so fascinating to be able to check out books and turn in books and get them back. And yeah.
Yeah. When was the last time you thought of that library? It's probably a trip down memory lane, huh?
First time I'm 76, and that was when I was like 9, So do the math.
So the next quick question then is, what is your favorite library in the world and why? Do you have one?
Actually, I don't. Come on, I actually don't do a lot of reading. Maybe one book a month, as
Okay.
I somehow just intuitively get recommended by it, and I usually just order it so I can have it in my hands and read it. Probably the most elegant library to see is the Rijksmuseum Library here in Amsterdam. If you go in there, it's a tourist attraction just to walk into this huge sort of 4-story incredible library, built into something built in the 1800s, but it's basically research, art and art history research primarily, but it's huge, so it's gorgeous. So I love looking in there
Yeah.
and seeing all the art students doing their research in there. Yeah.
Well, I'm definitely adding that one to my list. It's kind of a dream to be able to just travel to see libraries. That would be great. So, quick question number 3 is, if the last library on Earth were on fire, what book would you save?
I hate to be egotistic if I say mine.
Oh, that's perfectly
That's why I wrote it, so it would be out there, for the world to have, as they might need or want it. God, what books would I say? There've been so many that have been impactful in my life. I don't know that I could pick one. Probably every year I've had some book that I read that impacted my own awareness and my own thinking. That reminded me of something really cool. You know, uh, Lately, for instance, a great book I read recently, which I think everybody should be aware of, is called Humankind by Rutger Bregman. Oh, wait a minute, let me put it in focus here. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, Humankind, Rutger Bregman. He's a Dutch writer, but what it's primarily, among a lot of other things, it's a rant about the sensational press and how distorted it's made people's perception of reality, because people are basically kind, and basically people will basically do good things when pressed to do it. And I think that's a message. Maybe the Times would say it's time to have that message a little more evident for people. So anyway, I've always got some favorite last book that I've read that
Yeah,
gave me some spin.
that's good. I think that book is absolutely prescient for the times. So, thank you for sharing. Okay, so let's transition then into some of the questions that we had with registration submission, because a lot of people are very, very curious about who was David before getting things done. So, can you talk a bit about your life before getting things done, and how is it that you arrived at being one of the most influential thought leaders on productivity?
You could have fooled me. That was not a plan that I had. It was kind of not so much I stumbled into it. I just kept following my nose, following what my intuition was. What most interested me next. What kind of, yeah, pretty much that. And then it sort of wound up there. But that's a much longer story than we go into. I'll see if I can give you a very freeze dried version of it. I was always interested in models, how things that we can't see affect things we can see. If you trace it back, I had 35 jobs. If you read my Wikipedia, 35 jobs by the time I was 35. My first job was as a magician, age 5, in Palestine, Texas, where we lived then till I was 6 when we moved to Shreveport. But I did magic tricks on the sidewalk for 5 cents. So being a magician, it's like, oh, what if we could somehow tap into something that you can't see and make something that you can't see cool? So that's always been kind of a part of my DNA, I guess. And then over time, I was doing all kinds of things. I was pretty much everybody's favorite kid. I was friends with everybody. I made good grades. I was the child actor in Shreveport. Held a lot of the children's roles in the community theaters there. Uh, then got into high school, and I became a champion debater. I loved sort of speaking in that way, and sort of having to think and speak in that way. So I was a state champion, debater in high school. Also, in the middle of all that, I decided to go, wait a minute. We had an exchange student in our high school. This was Bird High School in Shreveport. I had an exchange student there from Germany. I thought, wow, that'd be interesting. Maybe I could, maybe I could do that. Maybe go somewhere outside this, country and whatever. And I applied and got accepted to American Field Service (AFS), where they found families outside the U.S. who were willing to take an American student for a year. At the time, there were not that many that went for a year, so there were only 300 of us from the U.S. But and it could have been anywhere. It could have been Brazil. It could have been France. It could have been Japan. It could have been anywhere, wherever you found a family that was willing to take an American kid. And so I wound up living with a Swiss family in Zurich in 1963, 64. And that was fascinating, fascinating experience, and certainly expanded my horizons, about what was going on. And then I wound up going to a strange little college. My brother had gone to Yale and had not done very well because they wanted him to be into math and science because he was really good at that, but he was more of a musician. so that didn't work out for him. So I said, well, maybe I should pick a small college. And by the time I, having been in Switzerland and in, the high school I went to was just because the kids and the family went to that high school, was one of the top high schools in Europe, the Realgymnasium Zürich. And it was a block from the Kunsthaus in Zurich, the art museum that had a whole room of Monet's water lilies.
Wow.
So, just to go down and sit in a room of Monet water lilies when I was 17, 18. And it was 2 blocks from the Café Odeon, which is where Jung wrote a lot of his stuff and where Dadaism started, and where a whole lot of the very interesting things happened at the turn of the last century. I have to keep reminding myself, oh, it's not this century, it's like the last century. So that sort of awakened me, as well as a few other factors awakened me to the much bigger world out there. So then I got, frankly, recruited to a new college in Florida. It was called, New College in Sarasota. And this was one of the first schools sort of built. This is in the 60s. This was built on the idea, with actually quite a bit of good funding from very interested people, about how to explore, how do you give people the freedom to sort of form their own education? So there were no grades. It was independent study, design your own education.
No grades.
So I went to that school and actually got a degree. It got accredited by the time I had finished, and that's how I started out studying philosophy because I thought, well, martial arts, liberal arts, okay, maybe that's what to study, but that was a bit boring, frankly. And I found the philosophers wound up proving their original hypotheses by using their original hypotheses. I said, well,
Yeah.
that kind of doesn't prove anything. What was more interesting, because I had a guy who became my good friend. He was my academic advisor, and he was the history professor at New College. And his expertise was in intellectual history, history of thought. And he turned me on to, the first book he had me read was Oswald Spengler's Decline of the West, which was a very Germanic kind of a book, as the Germans are tend to do. But it was fascinating. His whole thing was about, they didn't use the word then, even translated then, but the paradigms in a culture that affect the architecture, the art, the science, the math, the social norms, everything. There was some DNA, there's some signature of every culture, and he identified sort of 9 of those cultures around the world, and that was fascinating to me. Wow, something we can't see affects how we perceive and how we perform, at very subtle and even ordinary kind of ways. So I think I've always been interested in that sort of thing. And then, I got very fascinated by American history, which I thought was fascinating. This is the 60s. And so understanding sort of what the American psyche was like. And so that was a little bit of my focus in school. So I wound up getting accepted into, a graduate program at UC Berkeley in American intellectual history, the history of thought, history of culture, history of why we think the way we think, all that stuff. So that's kind of that was my progress up to that point. Uh, but then at some point I got, I don't know, an inspiration, and I had a lot of internal experiences. You could call them spiritual, but I use that with a small s. Where it's like, oh my God, there's something bigger going on out here that I can't see, but it certainly affects how I feel and how I perceive things. And I had a few of those even as a kid. I'd be sitting in the Methodist church in the evening, and in Shreveport, and looking up at the a figure of the Christ, and whatever, and I'd have these internal experiences of where for the next 3 or 4 days I was washing dishes and helping people. It's like I couldn't help but somehow be an expression of this thing that I experienced internally, which is this incredibly beautiful thing. But I didn't know where it came from or how to get more access to it. I didn't even know how to define it at that point. But then, then when I was at Berkeley, of course, this is Berkeley, 1968. Come on, heady times to be at Berkeley. If you ever, I guess that's in history books now. I don't know, but there was a whole lot of the sort of self-exploration, personal growth stuff. All that started up, or was highly fertile back then in that thing. And so I decided at some point, I said, look, I don't want to keep studying people who are enlightened. I want to get my own. So I dropped out, basically. I dropped out of the school, dropped out of my life, dropped out of everything I was doing, and said, let me go find myself, or find who this thing is, or find the source of whatever it was that gave me, such a buzz, that I had internally. And then, but they don't pay people to do that. So, rice bowl and cave was not my style at that point. So I said, okay, got to have jobs. So I went to help people who seemed to know what they were doing. I didn't, frankly, I wasn't that interested in the material world. I was more interested in the internal one. But again, because, I like having, if I had to do something out there, let me find something interesting, something that was kind of fun to do, or something I could help people with. So I wound up being a good number two guy. So I helped a lot of friends of mine in their businesses sort of do what they were doing. But I'm Mr. Lazy. I'm the laziest guy you ever met. That's why I came up with all the stuff I've written about. And
Hard to
so,
believe seeing your
yeah,
roster of books.
yeah. Well, and so I just walk in and say, well, how can we improve? How can we fix? How can we improve what you're doing so we can leave earlier, or whatever? And so that became. Sorry, my doorbell is ringing, so my wife's going to pick that up. So then, what? So I started to explore. Okay, how can I would walk in and say, how can we make it easier? And then we'd make it easier, and then I get bored, and I go find another gig. But then I discovered they actually call people something that do that, and they pay them. It's called consultant. Oh my God, I could barely spell it. Now I are one, right? So in 1982, I hung out my shingle, Allen Associates. I said, okay, well, let me just try and see if I can just sell myself on a project by project basis. So that's what I started doing. But I was also interested because by that time, one of my explorations was the martial arts, and I got a black belt in karate, and very much got pretty much deep into that. I've been very interested sort of in the Zen culture and the Zen. Got into karate not for the fighting aspect, but for the arts aspect, the Zen aspect of the bottom line of it. Wound up getting pretty good at it, and but part of that was about clear head. The higher levels of training and interactions in the martial arts, a whole lot of it is about how can you keep your head clear. So if you're surprised by 4 people in a dark alley, you do not want 2,000 unprocessed emails somehow, hanging around your psyche. You need to be clear, and then clear, and then clear. You need to be very present. The mindfulness people days are calling it being present, focusing on your breathing. I learned that, 50 years ago. That's what you needed to do to get present, so you could be fully available for whatever challenge or opportunity you had in front of you. So given that, and then I got involved in my own consulting practice, and my life got more complex, as opposed to this sort of simple wait on tables, be a cab driver, all the things I'd done, then how can I keep myself clear as my life is getting more complex? So I got very interested myself personally in finding sort of the best techniques to do that. So I found piece here, a piece there. I didn't wake up one morning with this. I found that helps. Oh, well, that's a cool thing. And then I had a couple of mentors as a consultant, some other consultants I met who taught me some pieces of then what later on became this methodology that I published. But they work for me. Wow, I'm more in control. I'm more focused. I got more room in my head to focus on the stuff I need to focus on. I thought, that's cool. But I turned around and started using those same techniques with my consulting clients, and it turned out to produce the same results. If they did the practices that I discovered, they got clearer. They got smarter about their priorities. They lowered their stress level hugely and had a higher horizon to be able to see the game they were playing. So I went, wow, that's cool. So that became sort of in my early stages, that became a lot of the core of what I was doing we didn't call it coaching back then, because I was just basically consulting with friends and people who had small businesses or were entrepreneurs and startups. And then some guy in the big corporate training world saw what I was doing and said, wow, David, we need that result in our whole culture. Can you design some sort of a training around what you've uncovered here? I said, well, I'll do my best. And we created a program that turned out to be highly successful. We did a pilot program for 1,000 executives and managers at Lockheed in 1983, 84, and it hit a nerve. And I suddenly, if you'd told me as an American intellectual history major in Berkeley in '68 that I'd be in the corporate training world, I'd go, come on, who are you kidding? But I wound up, that was the audience that was very fascinated and was willing to pay for what I'd come up with. So that's a short version of a very long story, but then that became a whole nother chapter, Brandon, that then threw me into the corporate training world. My consulting turned a lot into just coaching senior level people primarily, who were either in my seminars there or somehow heard about me, that wanted help one-on-one at their desk side with them to help them implement this methodology. So I spent, so then fast forward from 1984 up through the next 20 years, I trained hundreds of thousands of people in different corporations, just referral based, and, coached, essentially spent thousands of hours one-on-one with some of the best and brightest and busiest people you'd ever know, walking them through this methodology. Then at some point, in 1997 or 98, somebody said, David, you ought to write a book about what you've come up with. I went, why not write a book? How do I do that? How do I do that? But it took me that long to figure out what I'd figured out, and that it was unique and nobody else had done it. So I said, okay.
It kind of seems to me like even though you left Berkeley, you still stuck with maybe the history of intellectual thought and how people think in writing, getting things done, because it's still kind of like a methodology of how people are thinking.
Well, it actually is it's a thought process that you need to apply, because if you want to have clear space in your head, you can't just move things around. You can't just organize your stuff. You can't just hope it goes away. Your head's at the crappy office. And so I just uncovered, wait a minute, how do you get stuff out of your head? How do you make sure you stop being distracted by things you can't finish right now? But it's a thought process. It's not just by rearranging piles of unclear stuff. There's a thought process that you have to apply. And that's a lot of the core of what I uncovered. What's the thinking you need to apply to that email right now that's landing in everybody's box while they're listening or watching this, by the way?
Well, with that said, though, can you give a quick refresher on GTD methodology?
Sure. Anything that's potentially something that you need to do something about, you need to make sure if you can't complete or do something about that in that very moment, you need then to externalize that in some sort of external system. First of all, you need to capture it into some sort of an in basket, some sort of a hold place. That's something I might need to think about or decide about or do something about. I need to park that somewhere And then I need to, sooner than later, decide what exactly is that thing I just captured. It's something I need to do anything about? I don't know. But you need to make that decision. Yes or no. Is it doable or not? It may not be doable. It may just be trash, or it may be a reference thing you just want to keep track of somewhere, or it may be something on hold. Can't do anything about that now, but they reminded me that the Mozart concert is showing up in 2 months. I might want to get tickets a couple of weeks ahead of time. So any of those kinds of things, those are the non-actionable things at that moment. But the actionable things, I need to do something about that. I need cat food, or I need to hire a vice president, or I need to decide whether we adopt a kid or not. When you have those kinds of things on your mind, those need to be captured. But once you've captured that, then you need to make some very distinct decisions about what those things mean. Okay, are you committed to do something about that? What would be the next thing you would need to do if you were going to move on it? What's the next very physical, visible, specific next action you would need to take to move the needle on hiring the vice president, on making a decision about adopting or not, on cat food? What's the next thing you would need to do? So making that decision, and those, you actually have to think to decide that. Those are not obvious. Some of them are, but most of the things most people have on their to-do list are still, unclear things. They haven't decided what the next step is. And if one step won't finish whatever this thing is, then you have some outcome you also need to identify, think about. Okay, what's my outcome about adopt? Not let's adopt or not. It might be let's decide whether to adopt or not. And that may be your outcome. And then you have a project, what we call a project, anything that's going to take more than one step to get to some sort of desired outcome or closure. So, most people have 30 to 100 projects. Should we change our insurance program? Should we adopt? How do I hire a vice president right now? Come on, ad infinitum. If you're a librarian, it was like, well, what's going on in your library that's not on cruise control? What projects do you have about upgrading, digitalizing, making more accessible to your audience? Anything on your mind about any of that? That's what we would capture in the first step. And then step 2 would be to clarify. Well, so what's the next step? What do you need to do? And what would your final outcome be? You get to check this off as done when what's true. Wow, we've installed a new digital program, or we've set up a whole new community program that's bringing people into the library, that weren't here before, whatever. And so that's the clarification step. Then you need to organize reminders of those things. You're not going to finish all those, even after you decide what they are, then so that your head doesn't have to keep spinning what those things are. You need to just park the outcomes and the actions in some sort of external brain, some sort of system you trust externally. And then step 4, so that's the organized step. Step 4 is just to be making sure you're reviewing the contents of all your commitments at these different levels operationally. Step 5 is then just making engagement choices about, okay, what do I do now based upon the errands I have to run, things I need to talk to my partner about, projects I've got in the library, yada, yada. So that's where a regular sort of review and reassessment process has to go on, because things are changing constantly. And so our priorities are changing constantly, and our content is changing constantly in terms of our commitments. What we finished, what we haven't finished, what we still need to finish, what we've decided we don't need to finish. That's an ongoing game. So there's a short version of my 76 years of what I learned. If you want to have a clear head, it's not free. You don't get there by focusing on your breathing or by meditating. Yeah, those are good things to do. But if you still need cat food, it's going to disturb your meditation.
Yeah, I mean, it can, thinking about everything that's in your head and trying to get it all out there can feel pretty overwhelming, especially if you're not used to pushing forward and organizing in that way. So one of our viewers, Joe, says that she's pretty organized after many years. The file cabinets are full, but still surrounded by piles of paper. And it seems overwhelming to collect all of that in the inbox first, as the priority needs to be on organizing her current to-do list. So can I collect and purge stuff later, or does that have to be first?
Oh no, just make it a project.
Okay.
Clean garage project. Right. What's your next step? Hmm. You know, I should call Gladys and see if she wants that chair in my garage. So just all you need to do is wrap sort of police tape around all those things and just make them a project. There's no need for speed. No need to finish all that. What you do need to do is corral them because you don't know which of those things is still yelling at you and which of those things need to be thrown away and which of those things have something you know. So you haven't clarified if you still got piles around you, you need to distinguish what's in that pile. Is it trash? See, if you got a full file cabinet, it probably means you haven't purged it in the last year or curated it, and you should. What you thought was important 6 months ago ain't anymore. Throw it out. Get rid of it. Clean it up. You need to give yourself room so that anything you want to keep simply as a reference, you need as much space as you need for that. You could have a whole library to keep your stuff. So it doesn't matter how much stuff you keep. What matters is that you clarify that's just reference and all that goes there. And you've also set it up in a system so you have access to whatever you might need whenever you might need it. So both digital and paper-based, reference systems are important so they don't clog up or constipate the rest of your world, which it sounds like this person has done.
Yeah. Speaking of digital and paper, so since writing your last edition, since your most recent edition, and then even since the pandemic, a lot of things have changed technology-wise, even in just a short amount of time. So Karen asks, how have your technology recommendations changed? She recalls that, as you've always said, to touch items once. Is that true for email? Is that still true for everything? It's very hard to take care of every email and text as soon as I read it.
Well, it's take care of it is a very different thing than deciding what it means.
Okay.
Is that email reference? Is that email something you need to delete? Is that email something you're just waiting for? What's the nature of that? So again, it's back of lack of clarity about the stuff you've collected that is just going to create more stress than it relieves by looking at it because their decision and thinking about all those things you haven't finished or haven't done yet. So finish the thinking, but you don't need to handle the email. You just need to decide what is that. If you can finish it in 2 minutes, you should do it right then because it'll take you longer to organize it than to do it. So any 2 minute or less things you should just do. And a lot of you right now probably have a lot of emails that you could zip off and you respond to and just get rid of in 2 minutes or less. So you should, clean that up. Anything else, anything's going to take you longer than that, you need to decide, wait a minute, that's a thing I need to do something about. What is it do something about? And so that's where categorizing the actions that you need to take, takes on a whole new spin. And that's a lot of where the customization of this methodology will be. Well, what kind of categories do you want to organize your emails in? These are creative writing things I need to do. These are things I'm waiting on from other people. These are things I need to, do as an errand. These are things I need to bring up as an agenda with my life partner or my business partner. So deciding what those things are and then organizing those based upon the context you need to see them in becomes a lot of the clarification and organizing process that most people just don't do, frankly.
Yeah. Well, something that you just kind of touched on that's been super transformational for me since reading your book is that 2-minute rule. And how it, once I read it, seemed like complete common sense. And I couldn't believe that I wasn't looking at the world like that to begin with. But that's why you wrote the book and not me. So can you unpack that 2-minute rule for us just a little bit?
Sure. Well, if there's anything you've committed to do something about, and what's the next action? A lot of people don't do the 2-minute rule because they don't decide what the next action is. Oh, I need to decide about this, or I need to handle the watch that just broke, or my tooth that hurts, or I don't know, ad infinitum. What's the next action? Once you decide what the next action is, you'd be surprised how many of those next actions can be done fairly quickly. Wow, I just need to surf the web really quick about a store that has that. Or I just need to set an appointment real quick with my dentist. Or I just need to, uh, frankly, my life partner just walked in. Let me talk to them about this and get their response to this. So many times, by the way, if any of you, if any of you held to the 2-minute rule around where you live, you'd be amazed how much cleaner your apartment or house is going to be. Just walk around and go, how many things you keep noticing? I should change that light bulb. I should really, glue that little thing. And so just building that in as a conscious process is just adds. I've had a lot of executives I've coached, believe me, and if they pay me big bucks, have said it's worth every single dollar they paid me simply for the 2-minute rule. Because especially if you're up at that level of game, a lot of their next actions are delegating actions. Let me then ask this person about this, and they can just flip around, take that email, shoot it to somebody else. It would take them less than 2 minutes to hand that off.
I think like in 62-minute segments later, your whole house is clean, and it's much better to think of it as little 2-minute outputs than 2 hours.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no kidding.
Speaking of like home life and implementing the 2-minute rule, you have often said that stuff is stuff, whether it's professional or personal. And one of our viewers, Rich, says, how do you recommend couples implement GTD together?
Don't. Forget it. Forget it. Unless you both read the book and both say, this is fabulous, let's figure out a way to do this. If you read it and you got it and you're trying to convince them, forget it. if you value your marriage or your partnership at all, forget it. Forget it.
Which is another set of questions all in of itself is how do you successfully implement GTD with people who don't know what it is or don't care to use it?
Well, come on. This is just good business practice. Why would you or any partner in life or partner in business not say, well, wait a minute, what are we trying to accomplish here? And so what do you think the next thing is that we need to do? And are you going to do that or me? These are not dumb questions. This is not some cult question.
Right.
This is how do you manage life? So GTD is nothing more than sort of boiling it down to the basics of how do you manage your commitments and your agreements with yourself and with other people. Now, once you start to do this, it will affect everybody around you. It will affect all of your intersections. Not that they're all going to buy into it, but when they know you're tracking every single thing they said they were going to do, and you bring that back to them, gee, dear, you said you're going to handle this. How are we doing on that? Need some help? You'd be amazed how much is that kind of activity and focus changes their perception of the value of this kind of stuff. And when you then look a lot more relaxed than they are, and they hopefully they get curious about how'd you do that. Say, well, you're not old enough. Wait another year. If you have kids, that's the way to approach them. So you first of all, you have to model this behavior. And once you actually do this behavior, it does affect people around you. It affects all of your intersections. It moves them all up the food chain because you're tracking your agreements with them. You're tracking their agreements with you. You're keeping track of agendas that you need to bring up relative to things that are appropriate to both of you. You're running errands and not going, oh gosh, I should have picked up.
So then what would be your advice about telling somebody where to begin implementing GTD? So you've been modeling GTD. The people that are watching you are like, this is great. You seem like you have it together and you're always focused, pen and paper. Even that would be your suggestion for like procrastinators, maybe even neurodivergent. Kristen, one of our viewers, asked where to start for a neurodivergent person. Pen and paper, it still stands. Okay.
There's no difference. It's just called externalize it somewhere. get it out of your head. I just made a note in a conversation before earlier today. New horn rim glasses.
New horn
Uh,
glasses.
I already have an action about that, but I hadn't made that a project yet
Mhm.
to make sure I finally get those, get the right ones. So, I have to do what I teach. I eat my own dog food. It's like I, I'm even at 76 to keep a clear head, which I still love to do and need to do. I have to do all this as well. So I have to capture it. Then I'm going to look at that and go, okay, how do I get rid of that piece of paper? I go, okay, David, add that to your project list, which I will do probably before the night ends. And then I'm going to keep using that as a reminder. David, how are we doing about horn rim glasses? Oh, that reminds me, I need to. So, this is, I forgot what you asked me. You got me down a rabbit hole, but that's what this stuff is about. And it's not, I say it's not rocket science unless you're building rockets, then it is. You know, you're going to need, when you fly to Jupiter, you're still going to need an end tray to capture things that people might need to decide or do something about. You're still going to need to decide what do we need to do about that and who's doing it. You still need to keep track of all the doings that have to be done to make sure this whole enterprise manages that thing well. And you still need to review all those appropriately so that you feel like you're going to get there in a streamlined way. So I didn't make this up. I just boiled it down and uncovered the core elements of how do you stay clear about your commitments.
Well, one of the ways that I stay clear is my calendar on my phone, because I know that my phone is constantly with me. So I put literally everything on my phone calendar, or else it might not be completed, or I might not show up. And I think this became more necessary after having a child because I just didn't sleep ever. But now it's become a habit. But I've heard you state before that calendars are really for only external commitments. But based on a lot of our viewer questions, it seems that a lot of people might really kind of resist that aspect of GTD. So can you expand on why you discourage the use of calendars for organizing?
If you can't finish it on that day, what are you going to do? Feel bad or have
Okay.
to move it to another day? That's totally inefficient and highly frustrating. Tell me I'm wrong. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the differentiation would be between tasks and external commitments, like you've pointed out before. So, like if I
Well,
have
no,
a big,
external commitment's a task.
that's true.
I need to go to that meeting. I need to be at that yoga session at that time.
Hmm.
Those are all tasks to do. They're just time specific. They may be day specific. Called that day, I need to make sure that I've called the dentist for my kid, or that day I need to make sure I've sent that FedEx, to this client or this person. Simply because that's time dependent. So
Right.
anything on your calendar, if you don't do it that day, should just be done. You either didn't do it because it won't happen. Anything that needs to be moved forward, yeah, you need to change meetings and reschedule something sometimes, yeah, for sure. But I'm talking about your calendar needs to be hard landscape. You look at that called that's the gotta do's today. The gotta do's. If you have I might want to do or I should do if I have time stuff, you're screwed because you can't distinguish between the gotta do's versus the might want to do's,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. So that's when your categories come into play.
Sure. Here are the errands I need to run. You want to write all your errands on tomorrow's list? Give me a break. Where are you going to put that? The next day? You have no idea what the next day is going to be like. Where are you going to put the 6 errands you need to run? The things I need to pick up from this store, the things I need to drop off here. The things
I think that's part of the
where
problem, right? Is a lot of us,
where are you going to put all that?
yeah, a
Anybody
lot
who
of us
keeps
try to keep it in our head.
well, come on. Anybody who keeps posted on their fridge with a grocery list is already beating your model.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that you've said in a previous talk that the research says we can keep about four things in our head
Yeah,
successfully.
but fortunately, you start to lose cognitive energy and then lose cognitive space. So yeah, yeah, you can keep a lot of things in your head. It's just you're not going to be as smart or handle things as well or be as present with whatever you're doing, and that's scientific data now. I
So
just discovered that operationally, personally, 40 years ago. Just it took the cognitive scientist, another 30 years to sort of come up with the research to prove it.
see, again, you're going to be in the history books about the history of thought, right? Um, I have I've heard you say maybe in all of your interviews that you have no training in psychology and that your methodology is basically street smarts, that you figured it out over, like you just said, your 40 years working in corporate training and as a consultant. So I have a kind of hypothetical that calls for your street smart opinion and intuition. Um, so say that someone follows GTD professionally, taking personal life out of it, and they still feel drained and unfocused and behind. They swear their brain is emptied of all the things. Is it possible that maybe they're just doing the wrong job?
No, if they've ignored their personal life, there, there's no answer to that.
So
You
what
can't.
about
You
burnout?
can't.
Maybe you
You
just
will.
move on.
Well, people burn out because they are making commitments they feel like they haven't kept. So understanding what all your commitments are and then being able to renegotiate them with yourself is a key element to this. That's deep stuff, frankly, psychologically. You break an agreement with yourself, you're going to disintegrate self trust. That's an automatic price you're going to pay. It's automatic.
Mhm.
And so, uh, managing your agreements with yourself has no distinction between personal and professional. A lot of the work that I've done with executives is more in their personal life than their professional life. Many of them, their professional life is kind of all structured and all fine, and that's what's getting them is that they've got kids that need to get into college. They've got assets that they should be rearranging in terms of their investments. They've got all kinds of. They've got elder parents that they need to manage elder care for, and a lot of that. And by the way, any one project that has significance to you, like elder care, for instance, if that's out of control and that you're inappropriately engaged with it because you haven't decided outcomes desired and actions required and organized reminders of all that will color your whole life and feel like you're overwhelmed.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, you know, like don't shoot the messenger here. I'm just reporting. That's the truth.
Well,
I've
speaking
seen
of,
it over and over 40 years.
yeah, and you said something important. An important aspect of that was keeping agreements with yourself. So being able to check in yourself. I think that maybe that's where the weekly review might come in. And Mark, our viewer Mark says, can you walk us through how you do your weekly review?
Sure. First thing I do is look at the last 2 weeks on my calendar. Oh, that reminds me. I told them because a lot of things will happen very fast and a lot of commitments show up, subtle ones particularly, that you go, "Ah, I should about that. Or, oh yeah, that's something that'd be cool about that. So first thing I do is review the last 2 weeks of my calendar and then grab all the OSs, the O shoulds. You can use whatever term you want, you know. And then I look forward on my calendar for the next, frankly, as many weeks as I have stuff on my calendar. Oftentimes that's pretty much for the next year, just to see what that reminds me about. Oh yeah, I told okay. And basically, sometimes it triggers actions I need to take. But most time it just reminds me, it just sort of frames me about, okay, here's my life and it's kind of time and space vector that's going on. And it just sort of, matures me about that thinking. It doesn't take long, a minute, 2 minutes, whatever. And then what I do is I go through my list, of actions mark off the ones that I've finished. Sometimes I haven't had any time to mark off 6 things I've finished because I've just been so busy. And then my project list, any of those finished? So then I sort of clean up my reminder lists of everything. And then, then what do? Then I sort of do what I feel like doing. Oftentimes that's, okay, are there any new projects or any new things to add to my project list? Simply, come on, everyone listening or watching this right now has had stuff happen in the last 7 days that you haven't had time to think about. Well, wait a minute. Yeah, that's still something I need to probably do something about, but I haven't decided exactly what that thing is or what I need to do about it, but you've got it. So that doesn't happen on the run because you don't have time to do that kind of thinking and recalibration, on the run. But at least every so often you need an oasis. And that's why the weekly review showed up as a sort of a standard. Okay, once a week, at least can you clean the deck? I used to have a sailboat. It's like, boy, when you came into dock, you needed to clean the deck. You need to keep the deck clear, because if that deck is not clear and you go out again, believe me, you could run into big trouble. So clearing the deck on some regular basis, whatever that might mean to you, for me, that's just cleaning up my action list, cleaning up all that stuff, cleaning up anything I've collected, making sure my inboxes are all zeroed out. And I've looked at everything I might need to make a decision about or do something about. And that's a habit that you actually have to build. You're not born doing that. None of you woke up, none of you got out of your mom and went, gee, mom, what exactly are we trying to accomplish? And what's the next step? Is that yours or mine? No. This is learned behavior. And it's actually a cognitive muscle you need to train about how to get yourself to regularly rethink your thinking and to do the right thinking you need about the things that you're committed to, and then capture the results appropriately and build some sort of reviewable system and process to make sure you're not. The whole point of this, guys, is to keep your head empty and to feel totally confident about what you're doing at any point in time. So if you have a better way to get to that space than what I'm describing here, be my guest. Share it with me, by the way. I may put it in my next book.
Yeah. We've had a lot of questions about being able to get to that point, to get to the next point. So prioritizing actions, basically. And Emily says, what's the best way to prioritize things and not become overwhelmed because we have so many things?
Well, you need to clarify why you're on the planet.
Existentialism. Okay.
What's your purpose? What are your core principles? What really, really matters to you? You need to decide what the vision is of your life, fulfilling that purpose, successfully, wildly successfully. You need to decide, are there any things you need to accomplish over the next year or two that are going to move you toward that vision? You need to clarify, what are all the things I need to maintain so that I can get there? Like my finances, my relationships, my dog, my fun factor, my health, vitality. And then what are all the projects you need to do about any of that to make sure you move those things forward in an appropriate way? And then what are all the next action steps you need to take about all those moving parts? I'm sorry, folks, if this were simple, I'd give you a pill, or I don't know, I'd have to find another job. But, come on. If you ask me, what are your priorities? I would just say, tell me what thing right now, if you did it, would make the most difference in your life. And it might be take a nap or have a beer or have that or deal with that ugly email you're going to have to grapple with in terms of how to respond to that. I don't know. Only you know, and only, and that's where I say what you need to do is make sure you've looked at all these commitments appropriately so that you do what I call galvanize your intuitive judgments. You need to make it clear enough inside of you so that you can make a quick decision about something just based on, let's call it intuition, or your spirit, or your gut, or whatever it is that still small voice that tells you, okay, here's, I think, the best thing to do right now. But I can't give you the answer to that. Only you have the answer to that. And that's a challenging thing to get yourself to be able to answer and trust. But one of the key factors to that is being aware of what all your commitments are. Most people can't tell the difference between intuition and indigestion. You know, they've got so many things going on in their life. They don't know, what to do about all this. That's why I say get objective about all this, get it out of your head. Because what you want to do is create cognitive space so you can then trust a more intuitive decision about the options about what you do. I just said a big wad of stuff there.
I think that it was helpful. Thank you. I think that maybe one of those things that also helps you prioritize are the categories that you've set forth in getting things done. And Kathleen would like to know if you can give examples of your categories. Do you have anything outside of the categories listed in the book?
No, pretty much the same. Haven't changed that much. My current categories of how I organize my actions are errands to run, stuff to talk to people about, agendas with my wife or key partners in our business, stuff to do at the computer, creative writing. I split off creative writing from just at computer. I do those at the computer, but that's a different kind of a psychological category. I need to be in a different space to do creative writing as opposed to just business stuff I need to do, there. When I travel a lot, I'm starting to do more. I split at computer and online because planes still don't have really good connections. So to make a difference between things I can do on my computer without being connected to the web versus things I need to have a good internet connection to do. That was a good distinction for me to make, made it simpler and easier for me to sort of manage my priorities day to day or sort of minute to minute about what I was doing. What else do I have as categories? Those are pretty much it. It's pretty simple. But again, my life at 76, I'm at a point where I don't have as much complexity as I had earlier on. Earlier on, I needed more. Well, actually, I do have calls to make. That's another that seldom does anything show up there because a lot of stuff is just being handled virtually right now. But I still have sometimes I need to make a call or two. And so I have a calls list, things I need to call about. But that's it. I mean, it's no big deal. You actually could park all your stuff, on one list of things you need to do. It's going to make it simpler if you don't have to look at all that when you go to buy groceries. Or we going to run errands. You don't want to see all the things you need to do on your computer. Why? So just organizing them by context just became a better way to do that. I've had people do some very interesting and creative stuff with their context. I had one lady, a very sophisticated professional lady in the UK, who organized her actions by emotional payoff from the actions. So these were service oriented. These were self-development oriented. These were I forget what her categories were, but she liked to see them called, here's all the things. Have I done enough service things, actions? So she could see those organized that way. So that's quite individual. And that's, by the way, how people customize their application of these methodologies.
Okay, David, I think we have time for one last question before we have to wrap up. So what is the biggest hurdle to people being able to successfully adopt GTD?
Your addiction to ambient anxiety. No, that's it. You're willing to tolerate being waked up at 3 o'clock in the morning about something that you should have captured, clarified, organized.
Yeah. Okay.
Period.
So we can sleep with a pad of paper next to our bed.
At least that, yeah.
Do you carry paper with you everywhere?
Yeah, I do.
Is that that's in your wallet? Very cool. All right, David. Thank you so much. I also want to extend a huge thank you to all of our audience members and the fantastic questions that you asked today. Thank you for tuning in to our Author Talk with David Allen. Without your support, none of this would be possible, and we thank you for choosing to spend your time with us today. As a reminder, below the live stream video, you can find a link to David's book. Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you all on August 3rd when we talk to Pulitzer Prize-winning author of Franchise, The Golden Arches in Black America, Dr. Marcia Chatelain, and on August 9th in conversation with the New York Times bestselling author, Liz Moore. You can register for these and lots of other great events on your library's event page. I am Brandon Adler, and thank you so much for joining us.